Today we're in the final week of being bold in a dying world. And what we've looked at is God has called us to be bold. In fact, there's so many ways that God has called us to be bold in this world. You know, He's called us to be bold by sharing our story with others. You know, if we read through Scripture, He's called us to be bold by inviting our neighbors, loving people even when it's hard. Actually, God even goes further than that, loving people that hate us. He says you got to be bold in your love. You got to be bold by living out the fruit of the Spirit. Be bold by following Jesus, by giving up areas of your life that you want to control, but God says, no, I want to control. He says, you know, being bold by trusting God in all areas, in like our finances, in our relationships. He just calls us to be bold. And what I have found, the longer I live, is there is one thing that seems to bring all of it to a halt. There's one thing that seems to just stop us from living out this call to be bold. It's called fear. Fear. I'm not talking about like being afraid of spiders or snakes or little puppy dogs or whatever it is that you're afraid of, the dark. I'm not talking about that type of fear. I'm talking about this deep fear that's inside of us you know what I'm talking about, where it like just churns your stomach and it makes your heart just start beating faster and it almost makes you start sweating and this fear of failure. Or fear of you know, like if you're in school, fear of losing friends or looking dumb or being disliked. That's probably one of the hardest things as a teen. I remember growing up. It's just that fear of, if I'm going to be bold, if I'm going to live out this faith for Christ, what is everyone else going to do? And I'm going to be an outcast if I do this. Seems like when we get older, it's more of fear of change or fear of the unknown future. The fear of the what ifs. What if this? What if that? Being afraid to allow God to actually take control of the situation and say, I trust you. Fear. And here's the thing we're talking about, and as I realize we're talking about fear, and even while we're afraid, even while we're allowing it to stop us from doing something, we can feel that it's wrong, can't we? We just know something is off. In fact, in 1 Timothy 1:7, probably one of my favorite scriptures, God says, I have not given you a spirit of fear. So I haven't given you a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-discipline. God says, I don't want you to be afraid. Now, I saw this statistic, and I didn't actually go through the Bible and count, but I saw a statistic that said that the do not be afraid or fear not phrase is found 365 times in Scripture. God says, don't be afraid. 365 times. I wonder why so many. Maybe because every day of the year we need to be reminded, right? Maybe because it takes so many times for us to get it into our head that we don't have to be afraid. God's got it. You know, I was looking at the mission statement of our church here and how it's about us being the hands and the voice of Christ in our community. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know, the number one reason we don't share His word and we quiet our voice is fear. And the reason we fail as hands is fear. If you read throughout Scripture, fear plays a role so many times. The reason the Israelites didn't enter the promised land and had to wander for 40 years in the desert, fear. The reason David's brothers didn't take on Goliath or King Saul, the reason they didn't take on Goliath, fear. The reason Pilate crucified Jesus, It's because he was afraid. The reason Peter denied his Savior, fear. The reason we're not bold in our faith so many times is because of fear. In fact, the nation that Isaiah was writing to, the nation that God was talking to, the nation of Judah and Isaiah, they had so much to be afraid of. The nation of Judah had been conquered. They had been taken away. They were scattered all over the place, and God was giving them this message of hope. In fact, we're going to be in Isaiah 41. In Isaiah chapter 40, God gives them this message of hope, saying, listen, if you just trust in me, you can rise up like wings on eagles. The old will not grow weary. And he gives all these great pictures of trusting in God. And then 41, he continues this positive message. He says, I know all hope is lost. I know it looks like it's been lost, but there is still hope. And in the middle of this message of hope, there's just this one verse that is beautiful. One of those 365 times where God says, don't be afraid. So this morning, Isaiah 41, chapter 10 is where I just want to focus. And look at this, don't be afraid. Starts off. It says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. If you go back a slide to right in the beginning, we're going to focus on this scripture right here, just this one passage. And he starts off, he says, don't be afraid. And he doesn't just say, don't be afraid. He gives you a reason not to be afraid. He says, first of all, he says, don't be afraid. I am with you. I'm with you. This promise is more than just God saying, look, I'm everywhere. And because I'm everywhere, I'm with you. Because the first time, when I hear that I'm with you, it's like, well, yeah, of course you're with me. That's nice, but you're also with that tree over there. Because you're everywhere. This is more than just that type of I with you. This is God saying, painting this picture of saying, I am right beside you. I am active in what you're doing. I am aware of your struggles and fears. A few years ago, I went on a missions trip to Guatemala. And it was just a wonderful time. I love going to Guatemala and being in missions. But we were in San Juan, and we were doing construction at the time with the missions team. And when we got to Guatemala, we were told that right when we get there, we can exchange our money to Guatemalan money. Well, when we got there, we were running a little bit late, so we didn't have time to exchange our money. So Pastor Luis, the missionary that we were with, said, don't worry, we'll exchange it, in a few days. We'll get there. Well, after a while, it came like Monday or Tuesday. We hadn't exchanged our money, and it was kind of hard to, get things or do whatever. And finally said, okay, what we'll do is during construction, just gather all your team's money. We'll walk up to the bank, and we'll exchange our money. Well, our team had about $2,000, $2,500 in American to exchange. So we gather the money. It's in the middle of the day, and we have to walk. It's probably about 2 miles to the bank, holding thousands of dollars. If you're in Guatemala, there's different places like at the bank, there's guys standing outside the bank with guns. Because, it's not really safe to carry around thousands of dollars in Guatemala. So Pastor Luis is like, all right, who's coming? Who's going to go, exchange the money? And I'm like, and everyone looks at me, well, you're the leader. Well, nice to meet you. Nice to know you. But it wasn't just me. I also had my brother-in-law with me. My brother-in-law, Richard. Richard is a police officer in probably one of the worst spots of Columbus, Ohio. He's a little bit taller, maybe about 6 foot, 6'1". He has more muscles than, he's just huge. The guy, he could, bench press me with one hand, I think. I look over at Richard and say, come on, let's go. I give him the money. You know? And we walk through the streets of Guatemala, and it's me and Richard. And I'm telling you, as Richard walked down the streets, everyone just made way. They were like, whoa, that is one big American. We're not messing with him. We had all that money, and I walked down the streets, and I didn't fear at all. Because no one was going to mess with Richard. And that's the picture God was saying. God's saying, look, the creator of everything, all powerful, I am walking beside you. I am with you. You don't have to be afraid. What's neat is the contrast between God and Baal. Because at this time, the nation that conquered them was worshiping Baal. And Baal was their false god, was their god. But Baal was not with them. Baal was actually the god that you had to go to. You know, you had the Baal idols you had to worship. And you actually had to go to him to get anything from Baal. And God said, I am the real God. I am all powerful. I am with you. So you don't have to be afraid. Remember when I was little, we had the second room in my basement. And it was scary. We had the main room of our basement, and it was nice, and we had all our toys in there. And then we had this entranceway that went into, we called it it was like the dark room. There was cobwebs everywhere. It's where the furnace was. Made noises at night. We were terrified of the dark room. The only time we would go in that room was when my dad would come downstairs. And we'd look at that door and he'd go, come on, let's go. And he would take us in there and we're like, don't leave us, don't leave us. It was the coolest thing ever, going in the scary room. But as long as Dad was there in that room, we knew that whatever was going to crawl out of the dark, my dad could take, because he was cool. God says, I'm with you, and if there's something too big or too scary, I'll take care of it, because I'm with you. He continues, he says, not only am I with you, but here's something for you. He says, do not be dismayed. Don't be dismayed. And dismayed, if you want to, the dismayed is don't be discouraged. Don't be sad. Don't be troubled. Don't be distraught. Don't be one of those, your head's down, walking around, the woe is me. Everything's horrible. God says, you don't have to be like that. I had a friend once that was dismayed all the time. Just had that woe is me attitude. And he said, you know what? It's just so hard to smile. That's what dismayed means, where it's just really hard to smile. God said, I don't want you to be like that. Here's why, because I am your God. Do not be dismayed, for, that means because, this is why. Don't be downhearted like that, because I am your God. God's looking over there, he's saying, hey, pay attention to me. When I want my kids' attention, I said, hey, I always snap my fingers at them. I don't know why. Ben, look at me, right? Carter, look at me. I use their name, I snap at them. God's looking at you, he's saying, hey, Pastor John, look at me. He snaps his finger. He says, pay attention. Look at me. Look how awesome I am. God's like, look how awesome I am. Look how powerful I am. Look how great I am. Look how loving I am. Forgiving and merciful. Look at me. God's standing there. Look at me. How can you be down? What on earth can compare to me and my love that would get you so distraught? What can compare to me? God says. Here's the thing, I think what happens is we put too much stock in the situations of life here on earth, or we put too much stock in the things that we have, and we get distraught and we get down on ourselves and we get the woe is me attitude because we forget how great and wonderful God is. And it's easy to do. I had a friend that did this all the time. One day it would be wonderful, and the next day, it was woe is me. They'd get a new car and be like, hey, I got a new car. This is wonderful. Life is great. Nothing could ever go wrong. And then the next day on Facebook, oh, life is horrible. Nothing ever goes right. Woe is me. Why? Why does this happen to me? And here's the thing, we let these events get us down. We let the things that happen get us down, and by doing so, every time we let something like that get us down, by doing so, we're telling God, look, God, this thing that just happened is so much bigger and better than you, and so much more important than you, that I'm going to let this dictate my attitude. And God says, wait a minute. Look at me. I'm God. Aren't I bigger and better than those things? And think about it. It's our love for things other than God that get us down, isn't it? We start worrying about money and bills and all the financial stuff, and I got to make more. I got to do this. I need a better car. I need more of this. And we start to worry about those things, and it starts to dictate our attitude, and we start going, oh man, I just never have anything good. And it gets us down. Or getting rejected by a friend, which hurts so bad. But getting rejected and getting made fun of, or just losing a friend, and we let that just go, oh man, and get us down. Or being betrayed, or being insulted. And we take our focus off God and we put our focus on what is happening right there. And all these events, and God's going, hey, look at me. God's going, look at me. I'm your God. Aren't I better than your finances and the bills? Aren't I better than that friend? Aren't I better than whoever is cutting you down or insulting you? Aren't I better than everything else? How can you be down when me, the one and only God, is still your God? God's sitting there going, don't be dismayed. I'm your God. I'm awesome, is God saying. You don't have to be dismayed. There's a song that we sing in worship. I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Nothing compares to your embrace. Do we mean that when we sing that? That we do stand there and all our mouths dropped and wow, God is amazing. Because nothing compares to God. When we keep God in perspective, it becomes very hard to be dismayed. So God starts off and he says, look, don't be afraid. First of all, because I'm right there beside you. Don't be disheartened. Don't be dismayed, because I'm your God and I'm great. And then he continues. In fact, he gives us three things. This next part, he gives us three things that he's going to do for us. He says, if that's not enough, let me give you three things that I'm going to do for you. First one, he says, I will strengthen you. I'm going to give you strength. I'm going to give you physical strength, emotional strength, spiritual strength. I am going to keep you going. And he can do that. There's a few months ago, I was talking to one of the college students, and he was just talking about how he stayed up all night trying to write a paper. And it was like at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got to the point I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it. He's like, and then I discovered Red Bull, the energy drink. So I drank a couple Red Bulls, and he's like, I could do it all. I finished the paper. He was like, I was woohoo. I got it all done. And a couple hours later, crashed. God is like, look, I can be your energy drink. I will get you going. I will give you the strength, and it'll be without the crash and all the bad side effects. It says, I will give you the strength when you need it. Whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever strength you need, I'm going to give you. I had a pastor friend that was going through a really rough time. And we were talking to him. He's in one of my accountability groups in the district. And he was talking about how his wife had gone through just a horrible disease and basically became incapacitated. And he was 100% caretaker, 100% pastor, and raising his kids. And he was saying how hard it was. And we asked him, we said, how do you do it? How can you continue to do it? And he said, you know what? Somehow, God has given me the ability to keep going. He's like, that's the only way I can explain it. He's like, somehow I wake up, I have the energy to go until my head hits the pillow. And then the next day I get up and I'm able to go again. God says, I will strengthen you. And if that's not good enough for you, he goes on, he says, I'm not only going to give you strength, I'm going to help you. I am actually going to help you. He doesn't just leave us on our own. He just doesn't leave us on our own strength, the strength that he provides. He says, I am actually going to help you when you need it. In West Virginia, our house that we bought needed a new roof. And I'm a do-it-yourself type of guy, so I was like, okay, let's put on this new roof. And we tore off the shingles, and everything was going well. In construction, I have learned that everything takes twice as long and costs twice as much whenever you plan it. So I was hoping to do this roof in 1 week. It was about 2 weeks into it, and I was still working on it. And my neighbor across the street, amazing man, didn't go to my church or anything like that, just a good neighbor, one day came over, his name was Steve, and he said, hey, can I come up and help? Sure, I'll take all the help I can. So he came up and helped. I had some teens from the church, some young boys, they were in high school, seniors, juniors, seniors in high school, stop by and say, hey, can we come up and help? Yeah, I'll take all the help I can. And I got over and over, people just kept dropping by saying, hey, can I come up and help? And I'm up there, yeah, come on up. Actually, the best help I got on my roof was my neighbor's daughter. Her name was Caitlin. She was I think a junior in high school at the time. And I had all these young junior boys on my roof. And the junior teens, they were kind of working. Most of it was taking the shingles and trying to throw them and see if they could land them in the dumpster or, it was a very slow process. They were helping, but it was barely any at all. Caitlin came over and said, hey, can I come up and help? I'm like, yeah, sure. She climbs up the ladder. You would not believe how fast these boys started working. It was amazing. They were like, yeah, we can take up a shingles. Yeah, yeah, here, let me. And I got so much done thanks to Caitlin helping me. That's what God says. Look, I'm going to help you. I will help you. I'm going to send people at just the right time to help you. I'm going to send provisions when you think there's no way I'm going to be provided for. I'm going to provide for you. And sometimes God says, sometimes I'm just going to provide an outright miracle in your life. Just to help. And we can look around and we can notice the amazing help that God does. So God looks at us and he says, be bold. He says, don't be afraid. Why? Because I am with you. Why? Because I am your God. You don't have to be dismayed. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to help you. And this last picture he provides is probably my favorite. He says, I'm going to uphold you with my righteous right hand. He said, I'm going to lift you up. There was this picture on Facebook, as one of my friends posted. It said her son saw a frog that was by the road. And the frog was apparently going to jump over the road, but the boy did not want this frog to go across the road because he was afraid it was going to get hit by a car. He did not want a flattened frog on his road. So this little boy got down, picked up the frog, and put it in his hand. And she posted a picture of this boy holding this frog like this, protecting the frog. And she said, my boy protecting the frog so it can get across the road. And that is the picture God provides right here. He says, I am going to pick you up with my hand. I am going to hold you in my righteous hand and say, I've got you, trust me. Don't jump, don't run, don't do it on your own. Just let me hold you, just trust me. It will be okay. Be bold. You don't have to be afraid because God has us in his hand. And it's going to be okay.